We begin the service with words from the 23rd Psalm. Mizmor David, Adonai roi, lo echsar, binoteshe yarbitzeini, al mei menuchot yenahaleini. Nafshi shovei v'yancheini v'magalei tzedek l'man shemo gam kielech begei salmavet lo yirara ki ata imadi shivtecha umishantecha heima yenachamuni taroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorerai tishanta vashemen roshi kosi revaya ach tov v'chesed ידפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He has me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He guides me on paths of righteousness. He revives my soul for the sake of his glory. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod comfort me. You set a table in sight of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. We have come together, sharing our sorrow, to bid farewell to David Worshil. We recall the blessing of his life. We thank God for all that was good and true in his life, and for the precious memories which shall endure. Eternal God, Creator, merciful Father of all, be gracious to those who mourn. Bless them with your compassion. Ease their burden of sorrow. Send them light and peace, for it is written, "Fear not, as I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will sustain you with my power." And we say, Amen. Psalm 16 reflects our hope that our spirit will always be with God. I have set the Lord before me. He is always at my right hand. I shall never be shaken. Therefore my heart rejoices, my soul exalts, my body rests secure. For you will not abandon my soul. You will teach me the path of life. In your presence is perfect joy. Pleasantness is at your right hand forevermore. Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimini balemot lachen samach libi Vayagel kevodi af besari shkon lavetach ki lo tazod nafshi lishol lo titein chasidcha lirot shachat תודיעני אור החיים, שובה שמחות את פניך, נעימות בימינך נצח. We've just completed the festival of Sukkot, the last festival in this cycle of holidays. While we often think of it as a festival celebrating the fall harvest and being out in the Sukkah and close to nature, Sukkot is also considered a time of redemption. On Yom Kippur, we seek forgiveness. Sukkot is when we focus on giving thanks to God and feeling a sense of gratefulness. At the end of the festival, we celebrate Simchat Torah when we finish reading the 5 books of Moses and immediately begin reading from the beginning, Bereshit, in Genesis, reminding us of the continuous ending and beginning of the world. We are taught to be thankful for God's creation of this world and to cherish our days, as we say during our prayer each Shabbat, that we have come into this world to praise God, to labor, and to love. I think it was fitting that David Worshil, David ben Meir Nachman, left this world during the festival of Sukkot, his soul returning to God. He lived with a deep sense of gratefulness for what life had given him, and he was a doer, working and doing for others. He also had a loving heart, especially for his children and grandchildren. David came into this world on July 15th, 1935, the middle child of Nathan and Essenta Worshil. He and his older sister Lori and younger sister Joanne had a loving relationship throughout their entire lives. That is something to be very grateful for, and David valued his siblings and was close to their children. David's father, Nathan, owned Worshil Auto Parts, and the auto parts business became an anchor for David, who had worked with his father as a teenager and later in life owned his own auto parts business, David Worshil's Mahoning Road Auto Parts, where he specialized in selling parts from damaged cars he acquired. He was a well-respected, successful businessman for over 50 years. He received a great deal of satisfaction from the appreciation of his customers, who he tried to help as much as he could. David was gifted with a bright mind, a can-do attitude, and leadership qualities. As a teenager, he attended McKinley High School, where he lettered in swimming and was editor of the McKinley Senior Annual. After graduating from McKinley in 1953, David attended The Ohio State University, where he used his leadership abilities to serve as president of Sigma Alpha Mu fraternity. After graduating from college, David returned to Canton, began his long career as a businessman, where he built his good reputation in the auto parts industry. He also returned home, having met, while at Ohio State, his soon-to-be wife, Carol Ann Fred. The Worshils welcomed their first child, Beth, in the fall of 1959. They had been living in an apartment, and soon after Beth was born, they moved to a new home in Market Hills, the corner of 44th Street and Logan Avenue. This was the home Beth and her younger sisters, Jody, who was born in the spring of 1962, and Jennifer, born in the fall of 1965, have fond memories of. Some of the memories the 3 Worshil daughters shared with me were the following. Jody mentioned that when they were growing up, there were no homes on the north side of 44th Street. It was a vacant field, and Jody recalled a special birthday party she had when her father gave all the children kites. They went across the street to fly their kites in the open field. They all remembered David taking them sledding down the hills that were in the field and ice skating at Lake O'Day. There were lots of summer vacations that included ski trips to Michigan, and a very special trip to Niagara Falls in a large Winnebago RV that David had repaired for a customer who then let him borrow it. Each of the sisters was allowed to bring one friend with them. There were a number of trips to visit David's parents, Nathan and Ascenta Worshil, who had retired to Palm Springs, California. And David always made an effort to visit his sister Joanne and her husband, Tom Hornston, and their daughters, Marla, Amy, and Becky, in Seattle, Washington. And later, when his daughter Jody and Kirk were living in California, he would also visit them. David was also close to his sister Lori, who stayed in Canton. In later years, she and her husband Neil Libster hosted the family for Thanksgiving, Hanukkah, and Passover. The girls had close ties to Lori and Neil's children. It probably won't surprise anyone to hear that if you were related to David, he would be sure to help you get a car. He would fix up cars from his junkyard and give them to his daughters, his nieces, nephews, and later his granddaughters. Not only was David generous with his means, but he was also generous with his time. David would always help his daughters move into their college dorms, apartments, and later in their homes when they moved away from Canton. His daughters appreciated that their father truly cared about others. He was open-minded and respected other people. He was especially loyal to his friends, some of whom he knew from grade school. He was also generous to others. Beth, Jody, and Jennifer all mentioned how David would randomly pay for other people's meals at restaurants. Life was not always easy for the Worshils. It was a difficult time when David and Carol separated in the early 70s and then divorced. Despite this trying time, Beth, Jody, and Jennifer all felt their father worked hard to stay connected. There was never a time he wouldn't talk to them or help them in any way he could. David was always there for his daughters, and they pointed out that it meant a lot that he was present at the birth of each of his 8 granddaughters. Clearly, David's daughters were proud of him, and I know he was proud of them. After graduating Glen Oak High School, Beth attended the Art Institute of Atlanta and became an interior designer. She was offered a job in fashion merchandising in New Jersey and headed to the East Coast. And while there, as part of her job, Beth was checking on a construction site for a future fashion store and made several trips to the site. Unbeknownst to her, one of the construction managers was interested in getting to know Beth. Even though she was reluctant at first, the fellow was persistent. And tomorrow, Beth and Kenny Zansberg will celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary. I remember the beaming smile David had on his face throughout the ceremony. Jody mentioned how her father was a good listener and would always make time for her. She remembered having special times going with her father to the Front Row Theater in Cleveland to see Sammy Davis Jr., B.B. King, and Cher. They also went to the opening of the Richfield Coliseum in 1974 and saw Frank Sinatra. After graduating from Glen Oak, Jody attended Kent State and Kent Stark, taking courses in graphic arts. She later decided to go to cosmetology school in 1986. In 1986, Jody decided she needed a change and moved to Van Nuys, California, where she lived with her best friend from Canton, Lisa McDougall. Dave was very supportive and even helped Jody move by driving across the country with her. Unfortunately, after a couple of years, Jody's friend had to move back to Canton to help her parents who had serious health problems. Jody stayed and decided to put her artistic talents to work as a graphic artist at a print shop. It was there she met Kirk Arnold and has been with him ever since. Jennifer also recalled how David was a good listener. After the divorce, Jennifer moved with her mother to Fremont, Ohio, near Sandusky. She would call her dad frequently, and he always made the time to speak with her. She also was in Canton frequently, as she attended Sunday religious school here at Shari Torah. I remember her being confirmed here, and David was so proud of her. Jennifer followed in her father's footsteps and attended Ohio State University. She earned a degree in marketing, and after graduating, Jennifer had a job opportunity to work at the Leo Burnett ad agency in Chicago. And of course, Dave helped Jennifer in moving there. Jennifer also worked in technology sales. While in Chicago, she met Gregory Braun. And in 2 days, Jennifer and Greg will be celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary. I remember David being a happy, proud dad at the ceremony. In the late 1970s, David met Beverly Miller, whom he married and with whom he spent the next several decades. Marrying Bev added children to David's life. Bev's daughter Tolly was already a young adult, so there was less time with her. But Bev's son, Pete McLaughlin, was much younger. David was in Pete's life from when he was a teenager. Pete was close to his stepfather, and David was present in Pete's life. And after Pete married Laura, David was there when each of Pete's 3 daughters, Courtney, Morgan, and Riley, were born. David and Bev spent some of their married lives in their home on Santa Clara, just a block south of where David raised his 3 daughters. In fact, I became their neighbor, living directly across the street until David and Bev moved to Glenmore. David stayed busy with his business, his travel, and his grandchildren. There were Beth's daughters, Taylor and Allie in New Jersey, Jennifer's daughters, Nita and Goldie in Chicago. David also stayed close with Tolly's daughter, Michelle, and Pete's daughters, Courtney, Morgan, and Riley, who were all living in the Canton area. Sadly, when the pandemic hit, David suffered a severe case of COVID. He was hospitalized, but fortunately was able to return home. Sadly, Bev was struggling with significant dementia, and David's daughters would come to Canton to try to help. On one of her trips, Jennifer was quite worried and called Beth to come to Canton. Beth came and noticed her father was not doing well. At that point, Beth felt it was time to change places with her father. She was going to be the one to be there for him. With the support of Kenny, Beth moved to Canton. For the next 4 years, Beth became David's caregiver and advocate. She took him to Palm Springs, where he spent several months visiting friends David had made from his many visits there to see his parents. Beth also made sure her dad would have visits with his best childhood friends, Bernard Ryder and Bob Mack, who had moved from Canton to California. From there, Beth also took him to Arizona to visit David's close Canton friends who retired out there, Pat Gerber and Arnold Schiffman. And despite his failing health, Beth was able to take him to Pete and Laura's daughter Morgan's wedding this past August, where David had a wonderful time. Unfortunately, David's last trip was to New Jersey to be there for Kenny, as he was mourning the loss of his own father, Harry Zansberg. Beth told me that despite how he felt, David insisted they stay for all 5 days of Shiva. When they were back in Canton, David's condition worsened, and he was hospitalized. He had a significant tumor, and it was clear that he was failing. Fulfilling his wishes, he was moved to compassionate care at Woodlawn, where Beth, Jody, Pete, Laura, Courtney, and Morgan were able to see him just a few hours before he passed away. It had been a very good life for David. Yes, he had his share of difficult times, but he was the type of person who overcame his challenges and had a redemptive nature. His daughters said the most important lesson they learned from their father was to live with gratitude. He had lived his own life, always appreciative of what he had and of what others did to be helpful to him. As you go forward with your lives, may you recall David's life lesson. Remember to feel grateful for the small things in life and grateful for the special people in your life. those who are with you now, and those that were once with you. It is this gratitude that will bring you fulfillment and joy. Amen. Now there are a number of people who would like to share their memories and thoughts. David's close friend, Dr. Alan Fishberg, would like to say a few words at this time.
Thanks, Kenner. I wanted to just share a few memories I had of David and I and our relationship. I knew David for a very long time. To be exact, the summer of 1955, a long time ago. I remember that because I had just graduated high school and I decided I wanted to go to college. But I had to admit that it was going to be financially challenging, to say the least. So I knew that I had to pick a school where the state supported it and where I could find a job or two. So I decided on Ohio State, and I went to Columbus. Believe it or not, in 1955, the tuition at Ohio State was $75 a quarter. Hard to believe that, but even then it was challenging. And I also decided that if I was going to make this work, I should join a fraternity where I could pray, I could sleep and study and meet other students. I didn't know anybody. So I found myself at the Sigma Alpha Mu fraternity house, and that's the first time I met David. David and I talked for about an hour, and I realized that he was interviewing me and I was interviewing him, and we were trying to decide, is this going to be a match or isn't it going to be a match? And that's the way it went in those days. You had a few hours to decide if you were compatible, and if you weren't, you were out the door to the next fraternity house. As I think about it, it was very cruel, but it was the only system they had. So this is what we lived with. And while David and I were talking, I confided in him that I wanted to join this fraternity. I wanted to go to Ohio State, but it was going to be a challenge financially, and I might have to have a job or two. So David left, and he came back a few minutes later, and he said, I've talked with a couple of people on the board here, and I've decided we need a dishwasher in the kitchen. And if you will wash dishes 3 times a day for the school year, we will give you your food free. I thought, wow. He said, would that help? And I said, that would be tremendous. And that's exactly what I did. So that worked out. And a couple of years later, as the cantor said, David went back to Canton to join the family business. And he married his college sweetheart. I remember her, Carol Ann. I remember her very well. She was a beautiful young Southern girl with a Southern accent, and David was crazy about her. And they went back and got married. I went on with my education. I found myself in the School of Optometry, and when I graduated, I didn't have much more money than when I started. So I joined the Air Force in hopes that I could accumulate a few dollars. And as fate would have it, I always wanted to go back to Cincinnati, my hometown, and I thought I'd never see David again. So as fate would have it, I met a pediatrician in the Air Force who told me about an optometrist in Canton, Ohio, who started a practice, was so busy he couldn't handle it, and would I check it out? And I did. And I liked the practice, I liked the man, and decided to try it for a year, and a year turned into 50 years. And I spent 50 years here in Canton, Ohio. But it gave David and I a big chance to get reacquainted again, and we became good friends. I thought everything was going pretty well until I guess David's parents decided to sell the junkyard, like the cantor said, and they moved to Palm Springs, California to retire. And although David and I never discussed it, I always thought he was sort of alone, but he bounced back. And the junk business was the best business he knew, so he started his own. And it became very successful, very successful. I used to go down there and visit with David, and I could not believe how hard he worked. he came across some rough, tough customers down there, but David was just as rough and tough as they were, and he made it work. I thought that was terrific. And David was not only a hard worker, but he was very generous, like the cantor was saying. He was very generous with his family. He was very generous with the community. Like his obituary said, he's supported financially all three religious organizations. And as time went on, I'm trying to think what else I was going to say. He was not only generous to his family, he was also generous to the public, people he didn't even know. I can remember going to lunch and dinner with David, and he would look across the room, and he would see somebody who maybe looked a little needy, maybe they were dressed shabbily, and he would call the waitress over and say, I want to pay for their check. Whatever they want to order, give it to me, I'm going to pay the bill. And I would say to myself, I don't know anybody who would do something like that. And I remember one time we went into McDonald's, and there was a young girl behind the counter there, and she's a beautiful little girl, but she opened her mouth and her teeth were crooked, they were disfigured, they were dirty, and David, never shy, said, why don't you fix that? And she said, I work at McDonald's, I can't afford to do that. And he said, I'm going to help you, I'm going to fix that. I was shocked, and I'm sure that little girl was even more shocked. And he did. I don't know what it cost him in dental bills and orthodontic bills, but we went back to check out the finished product a while later, and I'll tell you, this girl just lit up. I mean, she recognized David, of course, and she gave him the biggest smile. She was beautiful. Her teeth were gorgeous. She was so grateful. And I thought to myself, I don't know anybody who would do something like that. So those are some of my memories of David. Besides his three children, Jennifer and Jody and Beth and the rest of his family, no one's going to miss him more than me. I've said it before and I'll say it again. David Worshil was the brother I never had, and he deserves to rest in peace. Well, thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing. Now we have Steve Barnett. He'll share memories from the Barnett and Lipster family. Nephew Steve Barnett.
When we were little kids, Uncle Dave gave us the most valuable thing he had, and that was time. He always had time to play with us, either outside or on the floor in their sunken living room near 44th Street there. He always had time for all of his nieces and nephews. When I was around 7 years old and they had moved into the new house, Beth had just been born, I was trying to figure out some math problems that I was learning in school. And my little brain always wanted things to be kind of logical. So I figured that since 2 plus 2 equals 4, and 2 times 2 equals 4, then 3 times 3 should be 6, and 4 times 4 should be 8. Well, Uncle Dave and Aunt Carol Ann sat me down, and they showed me on paper with little hash marks that what I wanted to be logical wasn't always logical. And it's a lesson that affects me almost every day. As we got older and Uncle Dave had his own kids, he still had time for us. He taught Mitch how to drive, he taught Brenda how to drive, and he would put me out in the junkyard with Yancey, and we would take parts off cars for some of his customers. And it turned out that taking parts off these cars taught me how to repair things, and it set the foundation for me being able to fix things my entire life. When I was 14 or 15 years old and teaching myself about electricity, he let me design and install an alarm system in the 6 or 7 buildings of the Mahoning Road store, and the system was still in operation when he sold the store to George Broad. As I got older and more educated, though, I learned that the system I created was kind of dangerous. Fortunately, nothing blew up. Uncle Dave generally loved everybody. I saw him help out his employees and many folks who had trouble affording to keep their cars running just to go to work or go to the grocery store. He always asked what our kids were doing and how the grandkids were. He always showed an interest in everything we were doing. When he visited our property in southern Ohio, he wanted to know what was growing, how we did maple syrup, how we built the ponds, how we built the house, and he wanted a full story and demonstration on the ancient hunting weapon that I compete in. Our family has a long line of folks that try to be funny. Uncle Dave wasn't the first, and he's far from the last, but he was the best. When I was thinking about representing the Barnett-Libster clan up here, the thing that came to my mind was the Hebrew cemetery and all the relatives that we have there. When I was younger, we used to go to the cemetery sometimes, and I'd try to find different relatives. We'd have a little chart, a little map type thing, and finding the relatives out there was virtually impossible. But every time we looked for someone out there, we always ran into relatives that we weren't looking for. That's how many were out there. So I might be wrong, but Uncle Dave might be the last person in our family to make this journey to that cemetery.
Thank you. And now we have Dave's sister, Joanne.
Let's put this here so I don't drop it. Okay, oh, that's good.
You can stand on it if you want.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My brother Dave was a blessing in my life. He was 6.5 years younger than I. And when you're little, that's significant. I always looked up to him. And he was kind and good to me, but he could have considered me a little brat. But he was so generous and showed concern even when we were children. I was the youngest of the 3 kids, and Dave was my protector. I grew up in a neighborhood of boys my age who lived all around us. I was a real tomboy, and we played tag in the streets and in front of our houses. We threw football and played cops and robbers. But one day, one of the boys got tennis racket happy and started swinging and hitting me with a tennis racket. And I had red welts all up and down my arms. I ran home, and when my brother saw that, he asked, "Who did that?" Well, it happened to be the younger brother of a very close friend of his. He took me by the hand, and we walked over to the next block where they lived to show his friend my red, swollen arm. And he said, "This is what your brother did to my sister. You need to make him accountable." I was really grateful and impressed that my brother stood up for me. My brother, however, sometimes got me in trouble. Dave was the family comic, and he often told jokes at the dinner table, and especially at the Passover Seder. And he made me laugh so hard and long that my dad would get really upset. I would always say, "It's not my fault, it's David, he's making me laugh." And then he would kick me under the table again. But still, Dave always looked out for me. Dave and I were cookie monsters who especially loved the ones Louise, our nanny, made for us. But I could never reach them because they were stored high up in the cabinet. Dave would jump up on the counter to sneak some cookies and always made sure to get me some too. My brother and sister had a very close relationship. I always saw them standing up for each other as teenagers and adults, and they also looked after me like second parents as I was growing up. Much later, I saw how his concern extended to the rest of the family and beyond. Everything you've heard here today so far is so real and true. He really was that person. And when Grandma Bell's grave at this cemetery here, at this Hebrew cemetery, was sinking into the ground, he saw to it that that stone and that grave was rebuilt so that she would lie with dignity. He did the same with Louise and her husband Chuck when they passed away. In the same vein, when our mother died, David made sure that Ophelia, her caregiver, was appropriately compensated for all the time and love she dedicated to our mom. He was the most grateful, thoughtful person, always. Living across the country, Tom and I didn't get to see the Ohio family often, so we would meet in Palm Springs where our parents retired. And fast forward, these last 2 years were particularly special because Dave and Beth and Kenny wintered in Palm Springs. And we met them again as in the past and spent quality time together. I am so grateful for that time we spent. David always loved my family. He wanted to know about our girls and what they were up to. He and Tom would get into deep conversations and always put a wager on the University of Washington-Ohio State game, which, by the way, that generated from the fact that I went to Michigan, which was always a debate between the two of us. We will miss Dave greatly. May his memory be a blessing. I love you, Dave. And I need my thing just to make sure I don't fall.
Thank you for sharing. Now I'd like to invite the children, Pete, Jennifer, Jody, and Beth, to share their memories. You can either come one at a time or everyone. That's fine.
Is that good for me? Yeah.
You need that?
No.
Okay.
So I'm glad I'm going first because I'm not crying yet, but I will be. I'm going to read this because I have a lot to say and I wanted to narrow it down so it wouldn't be too long. Please bear with me. These will be the most important words of my life. O-H. Without saying it, my dad was saying, be proud of where you come from. You teach what you know, and my dad knew a lot. Everyone in this room has a story or something he told you, something he taught you, or something he did for you that made your life better or made you a better person. If my dad was putting a team together, he wanted you to be on it. If he had an idea, he could help you make it better, and he wanted to. Reaching out and touching someone every day was as essential as breathing for my dad. Now, I always say, I never met an antique I didn't like. The flaws are what intrigue me. Every item has a story, and sometimes those stories have a connection. And I learned a long time ago, if you have 3 of something, that's a collection. My dad was also a collector of people. He was not deterred by your flaws. He found them intriguing. He wanted to know how you overcame your troubles. He could find something interesting about every person he met and went out of his way to do so. Before I tell you my story, I would like to share a memory. As I thought about coming into this synagogue to honor my father on this day, the first thought came to mind was, when I was a little girl, no taller than the big round tables they would set up in the room behind us for luncheons and dinners after weddings, we would come as a family to these functions, and I couldn't wait to get into that room to eat. And I wasn't allowed to get out of my chair until I was done eating. I ate as fast as I could so I could get up and run over to the table where all my great aunts were. Aunt Fanny, Aunt Betty, Aunt Elsie, and my favorite, Aunt Molly. These women were my grandfather's sisters, and I couldn't wait to see them. The synagogue was one of my dad's favorite places to meet and greet people. Okay, this is my story. A little over 3 years ago, Beth and I came to Canton to visit and help my dad. One day, while out running errands, we ended up at Taggart's ice cream shop for lunch. There was an older lady that came in after us, sat down across from us in a booth. She looked disheveled. Her hair was all twisted up under a large hand-knitted hat. Her face looked tired and wrinkled. She was wearing an old, large raincoat, and she was sitting by herself. We watched her order. She sat very quietly, waiting for her food, but my dad couldn't take his eyes off of her. "I'm going to go over and talk to her," he said. Beth and I were like, "No, Dad," knowing the conversation would last far too long, and he'd make friends with her and want to buy her lunch. Before we knew it, her food came. It was a great big ice cream sundae with chocolate and peanut butter ice cream and whipped cream on top. That was it. Dad popped out of his seat, ran over. He had to talk to her. He went over and he sat right down with a complete stranger, someone he didn't know and had never met. Beth and I didn't know what to do, so we finished our lunch. He still wasn't done talking to her, and we knew we would have to go over to get him. The first thing he did was he introduced us to his new friend. He had just learned a whole lot about this woman in a very short period of time. She used to be a college professor, something to do with writing and poetry. Her husband had passed away many years ago, and her son lived too far away to visit on a regular basis. Also, she had a very serious kind of cancer that was certainly going to take her life sooner than later. So she made a pact to treat herself once a day, and on that day, this day, was her favorite ice cream. We were all so touched by her story. All of us gave her our best wishes, but knew we had to be on our way. Now, all of my life, I have watched my dad reach out to people, call people, talk to people, help people. But on that day, it all came together for me. He collects people. The most important thing to him were the people he welcomed into his life. The bigger his circle got, the better it made him feel. It was his motivation and his reason to live. If he were here right now, he would be so happy to see and speak to every one of you. So from my sisters Beth and Jennifer and I and Pete, our brother, I'd like to thank you for coming to honor our dad. That's my story.
Okay, this is the first time I've seen this piece of paper because Pete thinks he's going to cry. So,
I know I will.
to my dad, on paper, I was your stepson, and you were my stepdad. But in life, I was your son, and you were my father. Because of how you and Mom treated everyone, 2 families became one. Because of you, your 3 daughters became, all right, that's enough. 3 sisters. We are family. You never once treated me as a stepchild. You always treated me as one of your own. Whenever you introduced me to any of your childhood or college friends, it was always as your son. Growing up, you always guided me, corrected me when I needed corrected, and showed me the way. For that, I always tried to make you proud of me. How I turned out today is because of you and your guidance. I'll never forget the various cars I drove from the junkyard and literally breaking down somewhere and calling you. I will never forget the 1972 Chevelle you gave me, my favorite car I ever had, and to this day. I remember you giving my daughters their first cars, a Saturn Ion and a Dodge Neon from the junkyard. They loved them. I'm not so sure junkyard is correct. It was thank you yard for what it and you provided to all of us. I remember at a young age when I would only eat chicken when we went out to dinner, you taking me to Bender's in downtown Canton for my first steak. What a mistake that was, because this is what I ate from then on whenever we went out. I played all the typical sports growing up and in high school. I was a pretty good baseball player, but at the age of 16, you introduced me to this thing called golf. Wow, is all I can say. I never forgot all the golf trips you took me on with your friends. By far, some of the best memories I have are a golf course, playing with you. I could go on, but in reality, I couldn't have asked for a better father, mentor, and friend than I had in you. I'm sure as you look down on us, you truly see just how much you meant to me, my family, and all of us. We miss you. I love you and thank you, your son. Very good. Very good, Lisa. Are you okay to be by yourself? Okay.
Well, you can stay.
That was my speech, you should have said it.
That was good.
Okay. If Dad were here, he would be crying too. We were together 2 weeks ago, and there were lots of tears, knowing the end was probably near. I am Jennifer Worshil Braun, and this is my adoring husband, Greg, of 30 years, on October 29th, married in this synagogue by Cantor Bruce Braun. Although I am the youngest of Dave's 3 daughters, I am not the baby of the family. I am going to set the record straight right now. Pete, yes, Pete, who is the tallest in our family, is the official baby, let's say youngest, of Dave's 4 children. Dave Worshil is my dad, your uncle, your brother, your cousin, your father-in-law, your grandpa, your boss, your friend's dad, your auto parts man, your friend. No matter what your relationship was to him, I know that you will all agree with me. To know my dad is to love my dad. Dad didn't expect anything from anyone and was always about doing the next kind act. Once Greg and I were out to dinner with Dad at La Pizzeria restaurant. We sat down immediately and at an empty table. What we didn't know is that the people who were waiting for the table were sitting at the bar. Dad quickly apologized, and yes, he bought them their dinner. Dad did not like to inconvenience people. Goldie, our younger daughter, who is 20, reminded me of her favorite memories of Grandpa Dave. We'd often go to Perkins Restaurant for breakfast before heading back to our home in Chicago. The hostess area of Perkins had a claw machine with stuffed animals. Not only did Dad win Goldie and Nita, our 25-year-old daughter, stuffed animals, He had won an extra one for another little girl and had to run out to the parking lot to give it to her. Dad also loved reading books to our girls. Goldie remembers reading Where's Waldo with Grandpa Dave and thinking that they would never, ever find Waldo. Well, Grandpa Dave, in his never-ending positivity, assured her they would. When Nita found out about her Grandpa Dave's passing, she immediately went through all of the letters that he wrote to her over the years. Those letters brought Nita much comfort and closeness when she first moved out west to Utah for high school and then later to Arizona. My dad always had time to take my calls when he was working behind the counter at the junkyard, and I knew that he had customers to wait on. He would listen to everything that I had to share, mostly about my friend drama, starting in grade school to high school, then sorority drama to family life drama, and more.
Even now.
He always helped me to see things in a better way. My dad loved sharing stories with his friends about me, and even shared these two same stories with me during his last week of life. The first story he loved is when I ran track in high school, mainly because he knew that I was running as fast as I possibly could, while my track coach would yell from the sidelines, "Run, short stuff, run." I always came in last place and knew that that didn't matter because my dad was so proud of me for running the best that I could. Dad always said, no matter what you do, make sure you give it 110%, and I did. The other story that Dad loved telling is when I was a junior at Ohio State University, and I really wanted to be president of the American Marketing Association. I was uncertain that I could balance the responsibility of leading a student organization, work my part-time job, and keep up with my classes. Dad encouraged me, as he always did, and it was an amazing experience. Dad was always my biggest cheerleader and best confidant. I have a short yet funny story of how my dad took his dad job very seriously. When I was 19 and home from college for the summer, I wanted to make capris out of a pair of jeans. Accidentally, I stabbed the point of the scissors right into my finger. Since no one was at home to help with my punctured finger, I called Dad at the junkyard. Dad arrived home in lightning speed. He drove so fast, I remember the tires on his car were smoking. He drove me to the ER, and I worried about having stitches. Dad confidently told me that the stitches were no big deal and that they didn't hurt at all. He reassured me that the skin was numbed so I won't feel a thing. Thank goodness that I held on to his every word. After the 4 stitches were done, Dad was so eager to know how it felt. I couldn't understand why he was asking me after he told me that it wasn't a big deal. That's when he confessed that he had never had stitches before. I could go on and on and on with how Dad offered me support without any judgment throughout my entire life. And I will close with this. I made a picture for my dad when I was 9 years old. It was a crayon drawing of the two of us. And under the picture I wrote, "I'm okay, and you're okay." My mom had the picture made into a ceramic plate. Dad kept the plate on his desk in every house that we lived. I didn't quite appreciate the meaning of that drawing until now. I want to tell you, my dear, sweet Dad, that even with tears, I'm okay, and you're okay.
Thank you all for sharing those wonderful and touching memories. Adonai.
You're not done. I read
Well,
these.
I'm leaving. No.
I'm quick.
Sorry about that.
I'm quick. When I first came back to Canton and knew I couldn't leave my dad, I told him that he was the best mom and the best dad a girl could ask for. And he said that it was instinctual. And I told him that it was instinctual for me to stay here and take care of him. He was the kind of dad that took every call, no matter what. I guess you guys already heard that. And it didn't matter what was going on in his day, not only from me, but my sisters, my kids, and anyone who needed him. He was an amazing example of a great human being. After all of the phone calls, texts, and listening to all of his friends, colleagues, customers, and family, one of the comments that has really resonated with me the most was that my dad loved everyone unconditionally. That's a rare gift to be able to do that, even when someone has wronged you. I believe that if everyone in this room could speak about my dad, we would be blown away by each and every story that we hear. He was an amazing, loving person with 9 lives. And I would just like to thank each and every person here for coming out today to honor my dad's life with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach Hashem Adonai mevorach. God gave us the good soul of David Worshil. Now David's soul has returned to God. May we be comforted by God's love. May God's name be eternally blessed. Amen. Would you please rise for the memorial prayer? Malay Rachamim Shuchein Vamromim Amtsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Ashchina B'malot Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohar Rakia Mazhirim Et Nishmat David ben Meir Nachman Shalach le'olamo Began Eden Tehei Menuchato Ana Bala Rachamim Hastirehu Beseiter Kenafecha Olamim Utzror Bitzror Achayim Et Nishmato Adonai Hu Nachalato Yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo V'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of David ben Meir Nachman, David Worshil, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. and may he rest in peace. And we say, Amen. You may be seated. The conclusion of the service here at the synagogue, we will go in procession to Canton Hebrew Cemetery for the interment. After the burial, the family will return here to the synagogue for the meal of consolation. The family will be sitting Shiva at the home of David's niece, Brenda Barnett Miller and Lloyd Miller, 420 44th Street Northwest, beginning this evening through Tuesday evening from 7 to 9 p.m. There will be a minion worship service each evening shortly after 7. Do now please give your attention to John Arnold for further instructions regarding the pallbearers and dismissal.
Thank you, Kim. At this time, I would like to have the pallbearers please step to the rear of the room, and you'll escort Mr. Worshil.